Cornell, thank you for having us out here today. Looking forward to hearing your questions, getting your suggestions, and listening to your ideas. Connor?
Yeah, if you raise your hand, I will come to you. Here we go, first question.
Hi, my name is Josie. I went to a high school in Des Moines, Lincoln High School. It is the largest high school in the state, and on several occasions we went on lockdown. Not because there was anything happening inside of the school, not because there was gun violence inside the school, but because they were scared that if we went outside, the police in our community would target us because of things that were happening in that community. So my question for you is, do you have a plan to address the militarization of the police in this country?
Yes. Thank you for raising that. Cynthia, can I switch mics? Is there?
Yeah.
Just for the yeah, thank you. Your example is very telling, and it personalizes something that, for those who have not experienced it, can seem like an abstraction. I just met last week Ashley and Amber Carr. Their sister, a week and a half ago, Tay Jefferson, was in her home in Fort Worth, Texas, taking care of her 8-year-old nephew. Police officer responding to a concern from a neighbor, just want to make sure that everything was okay in Tay's house, shot Tay through her bedroom window in her own bedroom right next to her nephew and killed her dead. It happened not more than a few dozen miles from where last year Botham Jean, a black man, was in his own apartment watching TV on the couch when Amber Geiger, a white police officer, walks through the door and shoots him dead where he is. That police department, by the way, in the Botham Jean case, released to the press that Botham Jean had some small amount of weed in his apartment, as though that might justify a complete stranger walking in and killing you where you are. We know beyond these egregious examples, far too often, law enforcement in this country abuses the authority that they have, the use of force that we have given them, their ability to deprive people not only of their liberty, but of their lives. And we know that the consequence, unfortunately, falls far too often on black men and black women in this country. Without accountability and without justice, and without those two, you will not get a change in this pattern of behavior that we see. You also dishonor every member of law enforcement who discharges their duties responsibly, ethically, morally, and follows the very laws that they are sworn to uphold and defend. So how are we going to meet this challenge? One, we're going to make sure that if the local DA refuses to press charges or prosecute these cases all over the country, that we make it a priority for our Department of Justice and our Attorney General. This is a civil rights priority in the United States of America today. Second, we will condition any federal support for local law enforcement on full transparency in how they report use of force and against whom that force is used in America. Third, there will be no tolerance for violating the public trust that those officers have been given. They are sworn to serve and protect every single one of us, and not a single one of us should fear, based on the color of our skin, that that force will be used against us. So I'm very grateful that you brought this up in the context of gun violence, because it is those mass shootings, it is gun violence that claims the lives of people one or two at a time, and unfortunately it is gun violence in the hands of law enforcement in America with impunity today. That will end in our administration. Thank you for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Coming here to you left by the restaurant.
So you talked a lot about climate change, and with climate change comes natural disasters. And I think one natural disaster, or several natural disasters that people often forget about, is hurricanes. And we've seen hurricanes hit a lot of places in the United States very, very hard, but none more so than in Puerto Rico. And in Puerto Rico, which is a territory of the U.S., not a state, we see that it's drowning in debt from the United States, and that the U.S. and the mainland is unwilling to lift a finger to help the people of Puerto Rico. So my question is, do you have a plan to combat the injustice that is being done to the people of Puerto Rico?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think there are two things that we have to do when it comes to Puerto Rico. One, we have to immediately make the investments in the infrastructure, in the power grid, in the healthcare services that are too few and far between for those residents who need to be able to access it. You literally have, in some parts of Puerto Rico, third world conditions right now because of deferred investment in the United States. It has not been treated, though each Puerto Riqueño is an American citizen, have not been treated commensurate with their citizenship. That has to change. Second, we have to follow the self-determination of the people of Puerto Rico. If they elect to become a state, then we have to support that. 2 U.S. senators and members of Congress that will fight for them in the halls of power. Should they choose to be an independent country, we must support that as well. But until they have the ability to determine their fate, unfortunately, we're going to see this same kind of consequence play out year after year. And you're right, they're right in the middle of harm's way when it comes to the consequences of climate change. So we've got to get after it. Thank you for asking the question. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Didn't expect it to be right away. I need help, and my friends and family need help, and the help is choosing. And I've been feeling lately like I'm in an ice cream store, and I'm a person who likes all flavors. And let me say to you, from my heart, and to the other candidates, I feel like I'm in an ice cream store in a way. There are so many good people in this race. There really are. I feel optimistic. I know we're going to get there. So I'm in this ice cream store. We're in this ice cream store. What flavor do I pick? And I have a theory. Okay, I can use half of my brain, and I could just start doing the spreadsheet, the analysis. I'm a policy guy, so I could do spreadsheet like crazy, and I could do like Beto's here and here and here, and Amy's here and here. Okay, I could do spreadsheets, and then I could also just go by my gut. Honestly, neither of those are helping right now. I don't know whether to go spreadsheet or gut. So there's the ice cream store. So here's my theory. My theory is I'm not going to know. I can't know. I never thought a black guy named Barack Obama could win. No way. I didn't think the guy that's in the White House could win. My kids asked, and I said, no way. My teenagers. So here's my theory. Tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, this is an earnest question. My theory is it is not a zero-sum game. When your parents say you get one scoop, that's a zero-sum game. This is not a zero-sum game. If I back you, because the theory is you find somebody who represents your suite of values, broadly speaking. Don't think about whether they're electable or not. You don't know. Pick somebody you relate to and just get behind that person, because that will push the front line of those values forward. And whoever the figurehead of that becomes, whether it's a Beto or whoever happens to be, we'll all get behind that person. Is that theory wrong? Should I just get behind you tonight or somebody else?
Yes, you should. I was trying to think of what flavor I am. Mint? Maybe? I was wondering something. I tell you what, you in Iowa do have this very difficult decision to make. You have this incredibly important responsibility. First, in the nation caucus. Some of you I've met not once or twice, but 4 or 5 times, and I'm confident by the 8th visit, I'm going to help you make a decision on this. But you're taking your responsibility seriously. You're vetting the candidates, you're asking great questions, you're seeing us more than once to really make sure that when you get behind whoever the eventual winner, or winners to your point, of the Iowa caucus, that you know that you're going to send them off with an extraordinary push that improves viability and performance in the following primaries and caucuses, including Super Tuesday in my home state of Texas. So maybe one way for me to answer this question is, what do I bring to the table that is different than some of these other candidates? One, I'm going to be absolutely fearless in calling things by their true name. When we connected the dots for people after El Paso and said, look, a gunman didn't just magically drive 600 miles from Allen, Texas to El Paso and start shooting people who he thought were Mexican immigrants. He's responding to a president who has warned him about this invasion and this infestation. A president who, when someone at a rally in Florida said, shoot them, when talking about this invasion of immigrants and asylum seekers, the president smiled and laughed. He literally sent that shooter to El Paso, Texas. We're unafraid to talk about the president's racism or the fact that we have a white supremacist in the White House. We're unafraid to talk about the solutions to this. It is insufficient today to not be racist. You've got to be anti-racist and intentionally. So it's insufficient to say that you would ban all assault weapons when there are 16 million of them on the streets in our country. It may not be politically popular. We may have taken some grief for saying this, but I want to buy every single one of them back. That you never have to wonder, what does Beto really think or believe? I'm unafraid to tell you what that is. And then there's this. We're going to go everywhere and seek to bring everyone in. After we announced that policy of a mandatory buyback, I went to a gun show in Conway, Arkansas, to listen to the owners and the sellers of AR-15s and AK-47s and bring them into the conversation. And no surprise to you, they also have kids in school. They're also concerned about active shooters. They also want to do something to stem this crisis of gun violence in America. Let's bring them into the conversation and into the solution. Y por último, last thing. Here's how this might work. I mentioned that Texas, until 2018, had ranked 50th in the country in voter turnout, not by accident, but by design. We went to every single one of the 254 counties of Texas. We talked and listened to Democrats, but we also went to the reddest places on planet Earth. King County voted for Donald Trump 96% in the 2016 election. But they're every bit as deserving of being heard, of being listened to, of being fought for and being served. So we showed up and brought them into the conversation. End of the day, we won more votes than any Democrat had in the history of the state of Texas. Young voter turnout through the roof. We won independence for the first time in decades. And 500,000 Republicans voted for a Republican for governor and voted for me for U.S. Senator, with the requirement that I only show up with the courage of my convictions to those counties and bring those people in. I think that is the way that we defeat Donald Trump in 2020, and that's the way that we bring a very divided country back together again. So, not just for us. Join us. We'd love to have you. Thank you.
Hi there. Speaking of Amber Geiger, she's going to probably do less time in prison than my brother did on a federal drug charge. I have been really touched, my family has been really touched by the mandatory minimum. So can you please speak on your thoughts and plans for criminal justice reform, specifically in the federal system?
Thank you. Thanks for asking the question and for having the courage to share your story, your family's story, to help make the point. 2.3 million people locked up behind bars right now as we all enjoy our freedom and this country's democracy. It's the largest prison population on the face of the planet, disproportionately comprised of people of color. In federal prison, most inmates there for drug charges. 2/3 of those inmates are people of color. Someone told me, and there's a fact checker here I'm sure can verify this or tell me what the truth is, African Americans represent 3% of Iowa's population, but maybe upwards of 25% of the prison population here. Is that correct? That is correct, I'm hearing. That is also not by accident, but by design. I mentioned being in Montgomery. We went to the Legacy Museum as well. And on the wall of the museum is the 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery with the exemption or exception of those who are convicted of a crime. And ever since, the criminal justice system and the criminal code in America has kept some people down by law. A war on drugs became a war on people, some people more than others. How in the world are executives from Johnson & Johnson and Purdue Pharma, who have caused the deaths of more than 400,000 of our fellow Americans in this opioid crisis, running around scot-free in America, while there are people caught with possession of marijuana, something no matter how much you smoke of it, I don't encourage this, but it will not kill you, something that is legal in more than half the states in the Union today, and something yet for which you can still be locked up in America. Some people have called the war on drugs the new Jim Crow in America. I don't think they are far off the mark in that respect. So you ask, how do we meet this challenge? One, end that war on drugs, end the prohibition on marijuana, expunge the arrest records for anyone caught in possession of that substance. in America, and the mandatory minimums and the 3 strikes and you're out, and for-profit prisons in the United States. No one should be punished for depriving somebody of their liberty. But then I think we got to go deeper, and we've got to acknowledge some of these very difficult, hard truths. That 5-year-old child that I mentioned, who's 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled, the system that exists in this country, that's been in this country as long as we've been a country, until we acknowledge that and share this truth and tell the true story of this country, its creation, on whose backs it was built, and who is deprived from fully enjoying the success that their ancestors provided for, we'll never get to the answer that we're looking for. So those are some initial steps that we take, but I think the much larger, far more difficult conversation about who can participate and enjoy success in America, that's fundamental to the answer. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
So I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, and I identify as non-binary, and something that's really unfortunate for a lot of people, especially who are trans, is there's sort of this lack of understanding when it comes to healthcare, and the availability of period products for women is already extremely low. We all know about like the pink tax and the fact that they're taxed as luxury items, despite the fact that like it's not a luxury if I don't want to bleed through my clothes. But so there's this bias, especially towards people who are trans, or like myself, who are trans, non-binary, and when it comes to talking about things like periods, we get told like, oh, you can't do that because you're not a woman. And just because my biology is different than what I would necessarily consider who I am myself, there's this stigma around me even like going into a bathroom or even like using supplies that are available for women. So how do you plan to address in general this stigma around menstruating, but especially when it comes to the trans community?
Thanks for asking the question. And I gotta tell you, I think there was some large part of the answer in the question that you asked. You began by acknowledging, which I thought was beautiful, that part of this may be due to a lack of awareness. And so your willingness to literally stand up and grab the microphone in front of all these folks here in Mount Vernon and talk about why this is important to you and why it's important to other people who live in this country, I think that sparks some compassion, some empathy, some awareness, and some understanding. And then you then need to ensure that the policy and the laws and the access follow. And so following your lead, would love to make sure that you guide us on doing that so that we make sure that this is not a problem going forward for our fellow Americans. But then we also address some of these other larger challenges that you alluded to. The fact that in Texas you had a bill that was seriously debated, almost passed, that would ban transgender children from using certain bathrooms. Though they're far more likely to be the victims of an attack than the perpetrators of an attack, politicians sought to scare parents and voters across Texas for cynical political gain, with those children bearing the brunt of the cost and the consequences. A transgender troop ban, originally issued by this president by tweet over Twitter, dishonoring the service and the sacrifice of transgender Americans who've answered the call, put their lives on the line. We don't know how many times they have sacrificed their lives for this country, or how many lives they have saved in the process. Reversing that on day one so that we honor the contribution, the service of everyone who wants to contribute to our shared success. I think that sends a very powerful signal. And then last thing, and I've got to say this because it is not said enough. The impunity with which violence is visited against transgender Americans, especially trans women of color in America, has to be stopped. And we've got to make sure, and you mentioned awareness, that local law enforcement is trained sufficient to pursue those who attack trans women, and especially trans women of color, that their perpetrators are brought to justice, and that there's true accountability at the end of the day. This is a crisis right now in America, and it's a crisis in part because we have not been talking about it. So thank you for raising these issues and making sure that we make a change that you and others in this country deserve. Really grateful. Thank you.
As president, what would you do differently to avoid a repeat of the failed 1991 assault weapons ban?
I think it's really important. I think the assault weapons ban that you're referring to, 91 or 94, I think it was 1994. Anyhow, sunsetted after 10 years. So all of the difficult, important legislative, political work to raise consciousness and awareness and political will, after those 10 years have passed, and those who were then in Congress facing the wrath of the NRA and the gun lobby and the gun manufacturers and their political action committees, cravenly decided that though this had saved lives and reduced gun violence in America, they were going to do what was best for their next re-election and not what was best for their kids and this country. So I think we need to make sure that when we pass universal background checks, extreme risk protection orders, ban assault weapons permanently in this country, and then buy them all back, that this be a permanent solution in America without sunset, or we will find ourselves in the same place that we did after that 10-year law expired. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
When you were a representative, how did you handle your voting responsibility when your own values differed from those of your constituents?
Oh, this is a good question. I'll give you one example. So I was on the El Paso City Council in 2009, and we made the decision to extend health care benefits to the same-sex partners of city employees. It was unprecedented in El Paso, extraordinarily controversial, and it turned out to be very unpopular. We passed it nonetheless, but then faced the wrath of so many in our community, especially it turned out from members of the religious community. As a lifelong Catholic, I had Catholic priests coming to the podium and dressing us down for contradicting the word of God, or the moral values of a very heavily Catholic community. And yet I knew it was the right thing to do, and I knew that if I waited for this to poll sufficiently or to be politically popular enough, we might be waiting forever. So I think about the example that I gave earlier of the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act that followed, or marriage equality in the United States today. Though legislators had courage to do the right thing, may not have been politically popular, they were also bucked up by young people like you who forced them to do the right thing. And my conscience at the end of the day answered to those young people, those city employees who were counting on me to defy the conventional and political wisdom and stand up for them and for justice. And so that's an example of where we did it. Never easy, but we've got to do the right thing when we have time to do the right thing. And I feel like we're at one of those moments right now in this country. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
To your right, the other side of the room over here, this is going to be our last question.
Beto, I want to ask you about my driver's license. On it, it's a little tiny card, and at the bottom it says sex, and right next to that there's an M. That's not my M. That was an M that was pushed on me by society. Every single time I look at that driver's license, a little part of me dies. It is a constant reminder that I am not who I say I am. If I say I'm non-binary, the government, the society tells me, no, you can't be that. And so I want to ask you, Beto, what do you think the U.S. government at the federal level can do to ensure that people like me have access to third gender markers on driver's license?
Thank you for being here. And again, another example of the courage that the people in this community are showing by not just asking policy or political questions, but using their own lives or the lives of their family members as examples for why we've got to do the right thing. I think the letter that is on your driver's license should be the letter that you choose. That is yours to determine. And I think you said it far better than I can, but your ability to fully be who you are is for you to decide, and no government, local, state, or federal, should stand in the way. And in fact, I think we've decided when we're talking about human rights and civil rights in America that it's in fact the federal government's responsibility to ensure that you're treated equally under the law. So we're going to support you, follow your lead. We'd love for you to be part of this effort to make sure that we realize that promise for America as you realize the potential for yourself. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for helping us out. Have a great day. Let's have a